Right. So we started Perek Beis of Iggeres Hateshuva last week. So we're going to start from the beginning of Perek Beis again. We'll do that at the beginning, first few lines quicker, and then we'll continue where we're up to. So the Alter Rebbe here, the title is Iggeres Hateshuva. He didn't start discussing tshuva yet. At the moment, so far, he told us what tshuva is not. So first he introduced us to the Gemara that says that there's three types of kapara, three types of atonement, depending on what transgression the person committed. And from in there, parenthetically, he told us the difference between mitzvahs aseh and mitzvahs lo yiseh. And then in the top of Tzadik Aleph, he starts telling us what the mitzvah of tshuva is and what it is not. Mitzvah of tshuva is aziva sachet bilvad. He says it's, in the most basic, simple sense, it means abandoning the sin. That means that it is no longer a thing in my life. It's no longer something that I want to do, and I regret doing it. Those are the details. But to abandon it completely. And he brings different psukim for that. Then he says, however, then he goes on to the subject of fasting. And he says it's commonly accepted that fasting is part of the tshuva process, and the Alter Rebbe explains that fasting has nothing to do with tshuva whatsoever. Tshuva is something that's done in the heart, and it's not something that's to do with fasting. You'll ask, what about, he brings various places in Tanakh where they mention fasting. So he says that was for a different purpose. That was to avert a decree, a bad situation, like the plague of locust in the time of Yael. He's brought down in Sfarim the series of fasts for different types of sins. So he says that's in order to save oneself from the punishments, which can be, to avert the punishments that Hashem might want to give for various sins. That's what he said in Perek Aleph. So he says now in Perek Beis, and he continues on this theme in Beis and Gimel, he's going to be dealing with the idea of fasting. Okay? Perek Beis. All of the above. Page 182 in the regular print of Tanya. All of this refers to the kapara, the atonement, the mechila, forgiveness of the oven, of the transgression. That it is forgiven, pardoned, legamre completely, that he transgressed the command of the king. When a person does a complete tshuva, then he's completely pardoned. And therefore, nothing of it is mentioned to this person on the day of judgment. To punish him, because he was forgiven. And forgiveness means absolute forgiveness. The Eibishter is very forgiving, and it's gone. It's no longer ever mentioned again. The person is completely exonerated from judgment in the world to come. In other words, the Eibishter doesn't say, as human beings tend to do, that we may forgive somebody, but then when they may perhaps do something later on, we'll remember what they did the first time. So it could be 10 years later and they offended me again, or 10 days later, and I'll still remember the past as well. That's not the way it works with Eibishter. Once it's forgiven and forgotten. It will never come up again. It will never be brought up, not even in the final days in Yom Hadin, which is quite an interesting lesson which we can take in what forgiveness really means. To be able to forgive and forget means to literally forget and never to have to remember that again. However, that is only half the job done. We still have to reinstate our relationship with the one whom we offended. That we haven't discussed yet. Tshuva is able to achieve forgiveness. It's even able to achieve forgetfulness. But what about to reinstate that level of love, the intensity that it was before? However, in order that a person should be acceptable before the Eibishter, and desirable and precious, cherished before him, like it was before the sin. Anybody remember the first argument you had after you got married? And it was terrible, an argument. We just got married. What's going on over here? What's going to happen? Is something wrong with my marriage? But we got over that one. Probably had numerous more arguments. All right? Forgive and forget is very important. Forgive is easy. Forget is the hard part. But the point, what he's saying here is, it's very nice that we made up. But how do we reinstate? Fine, I forgave. Well, how do we reinstate that level of closeness that there was before the argument? That's what we're talking about now. To be desirable and precious before him, like it was before the sin. That there should be a nachas ruach to his creator, from his service. This requires something else. To be able to reinstate and bring back that level of closeness as it was before the harm was done, that already requires something else. So in the relationship of a Yid with the Eibusha, that's what a Korban Oila was brought for. A Korban Oila is translated as a burnt offering. A Korban Oila was completely burnt on the Mizbeach. Nobody, not a Kohen, not the person who brought it, nobody was able to had any benefit from that korban. So in order to reinstate that level of love between the Eibishter and the Yid, and the Jew who transgressed, you had to bring a korban oila. And that was afila mitzvahs hasei kala shein bo kadus Mrs. Bezdin. Even for transgressing a mitzvah hasei, a positive mitzvah, and a ordinary, you want to translate the kala, an easy one, which doesn't have kaddish and Mrs. Bezdin. We established in the beginning in Perek Aleph that there's three types of avedas with three different kaparas. There's mitzvahs aseh, there's mitzvahs lo yisaseh, and then there's within the mitzvahs lo yisaseh, the negative mitzvahs is also those whose punishment is death. What he's saying over here is that all three have one thing in common. We may achieve forgiveness, but whenever we transgressed, even if it is just a simple little mitzvah aseh, if you can use that term little, here he uses the term kala, light, we still want to reinstate that level of relationship. And for that, he says, was in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, a korban oila was brought. As our sages, as Razal tell us in the Medrash in Teres Kenim, there's a pasuk that says that it shall be acceptable for him, so that the korban oila causes a person who violated even a positive mitzvah to become rotzi, to become acceptable before Hashem. As the Gemara says, the oila mechaperes al mitzvahs aseh, that a korban oila is able to achieve kapara, atonement for a positive, the transgression of a positive mitzvah. V'hi doirein. A doirein means a gift. That's a gift that's given after the person did tshuva and after was forgiven the punishment. It's not that in the times of the Beis Hamikdash it was easy. A person didn't have it, he brought a korban and that was the end of it. No, the korban, as it says the pasuk in Tanakh, the Eibush is not looking for korbanos. What is he? He likes barbecues. It's what's in the heart that is what's most important. The korban serves a different purpose. That is, as the Alter Rebbe is telling us here, the korban comes to serve a purpose that somehow it's able to reinstate that level of connection and relationship. But it's not what achieves the atonement and the forgiveness. Like, for example, like a person who displeased the king, and then afterwards he appeased him through intermediaries. Sometimes you need someone to come and intercede. You got forgiveness. The king forgave him. I forgive him. I'm not going to punish him, but I don't want to see him. He wants to have that relationship with the king like it was before. So what does he do? He sends praklitin. He sends intermediaries or intercessors to speak, and then and then he forgives him. So this is the function of the carbon oila, of this doirin, of this gift. No, sorry. So he sends intermediaries, and then he achieves he forgives him. And yet, after the king forgives him, what does the person do? He still sends a gift. A mincha means a gift before him, so that so that the king may consent to see him, to meet with him. It's not just enough that the king forgave him, he wants also to be able to meet the king, and for that he sends a gift. So too was the Korban Oila, was a gift to Hashem after the offender offended, and the Eibishter forgave him, but the person wants to reinstate the favorableness in the eyes of Hashem. Yeah. So obviously we don't have a Beis Hamikdash today. That he's going to get to right after the parentheses. But the point what he's saying is that in addition to tshuva that we spoke about previously, there also is something else. That tshuva achieves halfway. We still then have the other half of the way to go, which is up to us as well, to reinstate that relationship. Now, in the parentheses, he comes to explain this expression of mechaperes, of atonement, that we just quoted from the Gemara. In the Gemara that we just quoted, a few lines of Kedisa Gemara Perikamed Dizvachim, that the Oila, the gift, the Korban Oila, mechaperes on the mitzvahs aseh. So he says in the parentheses, Veloshin mechaperes, this expression of mechaperes, of atones, and also another expression in the Torah. That it is acceptable. It becomes acceptable to the Eibishter to atone for him, for the person. This is not talking about the kapara for one soul, in one soul. In other words, he's warning what I said a minute ago. The carbon isn't going to achieve the kapara. That's going to be through tshuva. This kapara, through this gift, he uses the term kapara. Don't mistake this term kapara over here that the gift achieves the kapara. No, that's not the meaning of kapara in this particular passage in the Gemara. Rather, elo lechaper lifnei Hashem. Rather, it means to achieve forgiveness before Hashem, so that he should be able to give nachas to the Eibishter, so that nothing will remain of the avera and everything goes back. It goes back to normal. Kiddush Hashem the Gemara, as the Gemara teaches us there, because it shall be perfect, so that it be acceptable. So simply what Alter is saying over here is Korban, Oila, Doirein, Mincha, the gift is only to reinstate the relationship. That's the second part. That can only happen after the person has performed tshuva and achieved forgiveness. After that, you want to make up and reinstate and rebuild the relationship. That is with the doiren. That's with the gift. That's what he's telling us here. So fine. So how do we do that today? Today we don't have karbonis. So how we can do tshuva today, but how do we reinstate that relationship? What do we have in place of the karbonis? So he says, today or now that we don't have karbonis, in order to extract, to call forth the ratzon, the goodwill of the Eibishter. So what do we have instead of the karbonis? Hataynis u'b'makom karbon, fasting. Oh, we're back to fasting, and this we'll see is where the confusion that the Alter Rebbe mentioned about in the previous perek. This is how this confusion came about. Tainis, fasting, is not part of tshuva. Tshuva is tshuva. Tshuva is in the heart, as we explained. Tainis is to reinstate that relationship. It serves a different function. After the person has done tshuva, then comes tainis in the place of the carbon, as I'll explain now. The tainis is in place of the carbon. How does fasting replace a carbon? Because there's an expression in the Gemara, that what? The Gemara uses the expression that a person says that may the loss of chelbi v'dami, of my fat and blood, brought about through fasting, so the miyut of chelbi v'dami should be considered ki'ilu, as if hikrafti lefanecha, as if I brought a carbon before you. So that fasting, like a carbon, a person could have eaten, what was the carbon oil? Carbon oil, no one benefited from it. So you couldn't even take any home. That's why it was the most valuable of carbonis. Because you didn't take any of it home. Every other carbon, you took some of it and you had to eat some of it. But the carbon oil, not. So it could have become your flesh and blood. Instead, it was given as a gift to the Eibishter. So therefore, this is the expression that when we fast today, so we are missing out on flesh and blood, so to speak. We're missing out on contributing to our own flesh and blood and to our feeding ourselves. And that is the equivalent today of a carbon oil. When a person is fasting for that purpose, not just dieting. Today there's all sorts of diets. There's also a fasting diet. I don't know if you've ever seen this one. People try all the different diets. One of them is fasting now. A tinus is not fasting. It's not a fasting diet. A tinus is rather to be able to contribute, so to speak, a piece of me to Hashem, like the carbon. That's the idea, comes from the Gemara here that we're quoting. So the purpose of the fasting is that we become acceptable to Hashem like we were before the transgression. We don't have the carbon oil, so I'll do it with my own body. This is where we're up to from last week. That's why we find stories of various Tanoim and Amiroim of the Mishnah and the Gemara that shall davar kal, that for a simple or a light, you can even call trivial thing, they undertook many fasts. It wasn't an Aveda, they weren't doing tshuva for that. Rather, it was a trivial thing, it was a davar kal, it was a trivial thing. But they took upon themselves many tiniers. For example, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, shoyu matir, shetehei pora yitzaz b'ritzua shebein kaner b'Shabbos. So there's a Mishnah that says, so there's the whole discussion. We know that the pasuk says, we say it in Kiddush Shabbos Day, it's in the Aseret Iggeres. Zocher yom Shabbos l'katche. You should keep Shabbos. You shouldn't do any work. Who shouldn't do any work? Ato, uvincho, vitecho, avdocho, vamoscha, v'techo. You, your family, your children, your slaves, and your behemoth, your animal. An animal is not allowed to do work on Shabbos either. So therefore, there's a discussion in the Mishnah whether, just as we're not allowed to carry on Shabbos, is my animal allowed to carry on Shabbos? So the din is that an animal, for example, with the yoke, the harness of an animal, which today would be the equivalent of the leash on a dog. People ask if they can walk the dog on Shabbos. Without the leash, it's permitted. You're not allowed to taking the leash outside is carrying. So there's no question. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah there in the Mishnah is speaking about this is an ornament or an ornamental type of ribbon, or ritzua means like a rope or something, but it was for ornamental purposes. So some people had it, some people didn't have it between the horns of their cow. So the discussion over there is, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that that's permissible because it's not considered carrying; it's like an ornament. But the Chachamim Eisrim, Mishnah says that the Chachamim forbid this. And the din follows the majority. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would have to concede to the Chachamim. And you're not allowed. So the Gemara tells the story that Pa'amachaz Yotza Kain Parasa Shel Shchinasei. His neighbor, his female neighbor's cow, went out on Shabbos with this ornament on the cow's head. And what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, v'loi michaba, he didn't say anything about it. He should have told her, hey, you're not allowed. You see somebody doing something wrong, he's supposed to tell them. He didn't say anything to his neighbor. It's interesting, I don't know why the Gemara points out that it was nafka a female neighbor. In any case, v'loi michaba. And then he realized that he did something wrong. Now, did he do something wrong? She should have known better and not let her cow out on Shabbos like that. He just didn't say anything to her. He started fasting to the point, says the Gemara, that v'hushcheru shinov mipnei hatzemis. His teeth blackened because of fasting. Why did he fast? Al shalekiyim divrei chaveirav, because he did not support the instruction of, or the opinion of chaveirav, of his colleagues.
Sorry. Hello? Sorry. He said parasol. It's a oi, so why is it a female?
Sorry?
He said yatsa ken paraso shel shachanto. It paraso oi. So why do they say it's a female?
Oh,
it's
I
a
think
female
from shchentoi, which shchenoi would be male, shchentoi would be, you're right, parasoi would be his. So maybe I'm wrong, but shchenosoi means a female. Shchenoi is a male neighbor.
Right.
Okay,
so
it's a grammar question here in the Gemara.
It says his cow, so a
But
cow.
and he didn't say anything to her, so it's clearly talking about a female neighbor. So the question is why it says parasoi. Okay.
Yeah, it's a bit confusing. Okay.
It's a Hebrew grammar question. Okay, fair enough. So what did he do? He fasted until his teeth were blackened. For what? He didn't do anything. He just didn't support he didn't support the opinion of the view of his colleagues. And so to V'chein Rabbi Yeshua, we're at page Tzadik Beis already. V'chein Rabbi Yeshua, another story, Rabbi Yeshua says, Boishani, Sha'omar, he says, Boishani midevrechem Beit Shammai. I'm ashamed of your words, Beit Shammai, which wasn't a nice thing to say. Then he realized what he did. He spoke like that to Beit Shammai. So v'hushcheru shinov mipnei hatzemis, his teeth turned black also because of his fasting. A third example, the Rav Huna, the Ritzua, the strap of his tefillin, nishapcha, turned over, right? The tefillin, the men who wear the tefillin, so the tefillin on the head and the arm, so there's black on one side, the other side is usually white. And the white side is supposed to be in, and the black side is supposed to be out. And by mistake, his strap of the tefillin, nishapcha, it turned over. V'hisana mem tzemis, and he undertook 40 fasts. The Kahina rabbis, and there are many such instances recorded in the Mishnah and the Gemara. These Tanesim, what they have in common is they're not Tanesim that were taken for the purposes of tshuva, nor as a self-inflicted suffering for tshuva. Because these type of, if you want to use even the word sins, don't require that type of tshuva. The only purpose of the fasting was to restore the bonds of love between the sinner and the Eibishter. That was the purpose of the fasting. So he's bringing these as an example for the point that he's telling us over here in Perek Beis. And that is the subject, if you want, of Perek Beis we're seeing is the reinstatement of the relationship. To reinstate the relationship, it's not enough. Mediocre is not enough. Only the best, so to speak. And therefore, even if they committed what can be considered minor or trivial transgressions, it's not even a transgression. By mistake, the tefillin turned over. Or by mistake, in the argument, Rabbi Yeshua was slightly disrespectful to Beit Shammai, or he didn't say anything to his neighbor about her cow. You're fine. You didn't do anything bad. You don't have to do tshuva. But it's not perfect. And because it's not perfect, they fasted. It's a difference between a relationship that's important and a relationship that's not important. If the relationship with the Eibishter is important, then every little bit counts and it's important. If it's just mitzvah, with the expression that's used is mitzvahs anoshim milumada, that a person is, we're doing mitzvahs, the Eibishter told us to do mitzvahs. It's not particularly, I'm not particularly fond of it. I don't have a relationship with God. It's just I'm doing what he told me to do, whether it's out of fear, whatever it is, out of tradition, out of routine, whatever it may be. Okay, so that's not a big deal. Okay, so you don't have to fast. These were three examples of people who their relationship with Hashem was extremely important, And therefore, in that relationship with Hashem, they didn't want anything to get in the way, even what might be by others as trivial or insignificant. And that is what fasting, when fasting comes into the picture. Not for tshuva. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Or maybe it's the wrong time to ask the question. I don't understand how the fasting works to reinstate the relationship. Has it got to be an intentional? I understand it's replacing the korban, and we don't benefit from it. And I suppose we're not benefiting from the fasting. But have we got to intend it? I don't understand why it's not just doing tefillah that replaces the korban, why it's the act of fasting, how that reestablishes the relationship.
Okay, so in the traditional Jewish way, I'll answer your question with another question, right? And that is, which is beyond the discussion here, that is, how does a korban do it? The Alter Rebbe tells us over here that the korban, which is the korban oila in particular, it's unique in that this is the gift which is going to reinstate. That's the box of chocolate. That's the flowers. That's the card. Right? Today we aren't able to do that. So today we fast, and he explains what's the correlation of the fasting, because it's my own flesh and blood. So that's a correlation with the korban oila. But you're asking the basic question: how does a korban at all achieve that? Why does a korban achieve that? Why does the korban oila achieve that? Why is that the box of chocolate? Why is? In other words, why does Hashem enjoy korbanos? Which is a very good question.
Yeah, but I thought there was something like when the aroma goes up, it was more transactional. I could understand that as being more transactional. Whereas if it's us in this world fasting, that to me seems.
So that's why I say the topic of korbanos and how they work and what it's all about. That's a separate discussion. When we will understand that, we'll get to one day. When we understand the dynamics of a korban and the different types of korbanos. Some of them have to be eaten in a particular time, 2 days and a night, 1 day. When we understand the dynamics of a korban and how it is that Hashem enjoys it, the scent is supposed to be gishmak. It sounds very, very strange. We have a God who enjoys the smell of a barbecue. He doesn't like boiling. He doesn't like cooking. He wants roasted. What does that mean? So then we'll understand the significance of the korban oila, and when we understand the significance of the korban oila, we'll understand the correlation with us fasting, as opposed to, as you say, tefillah. Okay.
Right. Okay.
But for now, the Alter Rebbe is obviously taking for granted that we understand that, and therefore korban oila makes a lot of sense. And the replacement of the korban oila today is fasting, because the common denominator is we're losing what we could have eaten.
Right. So if we want to get close to Hashem, we should just start fasting?
So far, yes. But don't worry. Don't try this at home yet. We're still in the middle of the class. So far, yes. Later on, the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us what we do in place of fasting. But meanwhile, he's teaching us the significance of fasting. Not as tshuva, and he keeps reminding us that. Fasting is not tshuva, but fasting does exist in Judaism. So that's what he tells us here in Perek Beis, that fasting is to replace the korban oila. And what is that? The second half of this dynamic, not forgiveness, not kapara, not atonement, not saying I'm sorry, that's tshuva. That has nothing to do with fasting. This is something else. This is to make friends again. Let's make up, let's be nice. That's the equivalent of your husband buying you flowers. After, right? Flowers isn't I'm sorry. Flowers comes after I'm sorry. I don't mean you in particular. Okay. And then he gives us these examples. So what's the point of these three examples? These three examples, the point is, he gives examples of extremes which we can consider to be trivial. In a healthy, real relationship, nothing is trivial. Everything is important. And that is how our relationship with the Eibishter should be. And that's what we learned from these three Chachamim in the Mishnah and the Gemara. That even something which was trivial, they fasted. Why did they fast? Not for tshuva, because it didn't require tshuva. So the Alter Rebbe is trying to prove this point. Those were things that didn't require tshuva even. So what are they fasting for? Because of the doirin, the gift. There was no Beis Hamikdash, so they wanted to achieve what normally a korban oila is able to achieve. Why did it bother them? What do you mean why did it bother them? Because, what do you mean does it bother me? I want to be close with the Eibishter, and this, what I did, may be trivial to you, but with my relationship with Hashem, it's very significant. And therefore, I want to compensate, I want to make up for it. I want to reinstate the level of closeness that I had with the Eibishter as I was before. Okay. Okay, now rabbis like this, is many such instances recorded. Therefore, while you say based on this, that fasting is in the place of the Korban Ma'ila, and therefore fasting has place even when an individual doesn't need to undergo suffering to attain a complete kapara. It applies even for trivial things. For this reason, while you say based on this, limit Arizal Talmidov al pi chochmas haemes. This is why the Arizal taught his Talmidim based on the chochmas haemes, Kabbalah. He taught mispar hatzemes. He gave the number of fasts that are necessary. Lekama avenis v'chatoim. How many fasts are necessary for various types of avenis and chatoim, various types of transgressions. Even though they are transgressions of shein behen koris, and even some transgressions which don't come with the punishment of koris, and not even v'lei misa b'dei shamayim, and not death by the hands of heaven. For example, the Arizal gave a formula of fasting al hakas. For example, for anger. Anger is not a sin that's a capital punishment. But the Arizal said, Kuf nun aleph tainis, 151 fasts for anger, etc. He gave a prescription for various things. Some of them are for Isur Koris, but even for things that there's no punishment even. If the whole purpose of fasting is for kapara, then he doesn't have to give us fasting for things that are not so significant. He says, this is why. While you say that, based on this idea that they're telling us here, that's why the Arizal gave us different fasts for different things, because there's nothing to do with atonement, with kapara. It's only to do with reinstating the relationship. And even for transgressing a Issa D'Rabbanan. For example, what's an Issa Not a Deraisa, not a Mitzvah Aseh or Mitzvah Loisesa, but even an Issa D'Rabbanan. And the Issa D'Rabbanan are there to, the purpose of the rabbinic prohibitions is there as a fence to protect us from transgressing a far worse biblical Deraisa transgression. So he says, even for Isa de Rabbanon, for example, Kmoistam Yenom, is drinking the wine from Goyim. Right? Today, we know there's kosher wine and not kosher wine. What makes wine not kosher? It's because if a Goy, now, that used to be Deraisa, now it's the Rabbanon. It used to be Deraisa because the wines were used for Avodah Zarah, and the way for the pagan idol worship. And when a Goy saw wine, he would immediately consecrate it for Avodah Zarah, and therefore, once something is consecrated for Avodah Zarah, it becomes forbidden for a Yid because anything to do with Avodah Zarah. We just had it in Rambam a few weeks ago. But then, when idol worship stopped and so on, so the Chacham and the Rabbanan carried on the prohibition, but for a different reason. The reason that this time was for intermarriage. Which is interesting. All those thousands of years ago, they were concerned about something which is so prevalent today. They made then prohibitions for the three things to protect from intermarriage. They couldn't prohibit meeting non-Jews. So what did they do? They said, don't drink their wine. Bishulakum, don't have their cooking, even if they're cooking glatt kosher food. And pasakum, and bread. These are three things which, if you're careful with that, you can still interact, and hopefully they made like bumps in the road, fences, right, to protect us from that. And then hopefully, a kid goes to university and he meets a non-Jewish girl, so it'll cause some bumps in the road when they want to have a nice meal together. Well, sorry, I can't. It's not kosher. Well, I'll come and cook by you. You can't because it's bishulak. Can't have that wine because it's not kosher wine. I can't even have your bread because it's not kosher. It's not going to really enhance the development of that relationship. Though it can, but these are bumps in the road. So this is the Issa de Rabbanon of Stam Yenom. They made the prohibition of drinking wine from a goy. So the Arizal says that even for something like that, Yisana Ein Gimel Tainis. To fast 73 fasts. So to begin al bitul mitzvah say the rabbanon, and so to if one neglects a mitzvah say that's the rabbanon, like tefillah. Also, Yisana Samach Alav Tainis, to fast 61 fasts. What is all this about? What's all this? This is the prescription that the Arizal was giving. What is it all for? Again, it's not for kapara, it's not for mechila, it's not for atonement, it's not for forgiveness, but rather it's for reinstatement. Okay? And this is in place of the korban oila. Okay? And the korban oila reinstated. V'derech klal say that tinies, generally, as a general rule, the mystery, the secret, the seed of the tinies of the fasting, hisgulon niflo lizgalos rotzon elim baruch hu. We don't understand it. It's called a seid. It's a secret. It's a mystery. But this mystery of tinies is a sgula niflo, is a wonderful, wondrous, effective sgula. And he translated sgula. Lihizgalos rotzon elim baruch hu, for the revelation of the rotzon elim of the supreme will. That's why the Arizal, who was familiar with these mysteries, he knew how many fasts for each one. But the Alter was saying that don't take what the Arizal is saying lightly. This is a wondrously effective formula for the revelation of the Eibishter's Ratzon Elyon, of the Eibishter's goodwill. Just like the korban. This is the magic. If we knew, it's hit and miss. Couple, again, we go back to the example of a couple. Couple get married and then one is annoyed at the other, so they have to figure out what will make them feel better. How will I achieve to reinstate? It's hit and miss. You don't know. Maybe they don't like chocolate. What's the point of buying chocolate? What's the point of buying chocolate if they don't like chocolate? But it may have taken him 10 years to realize that she doesn't like chocolate, and it's not helping. Hope it didn't. I mean, if she didn't like flowers, or she didn't like those flowers, Just give me a second. Sorry about that. Yeah. So what was I up to? So until he figures out which flowers is the magic, we don't know. So we don't have a common oila today. So how can we reinstate this relationship? So thank Baruch Hashem, we have the Arizal. And the Arizal was familiar with this side, with this mystery, with this secret. And this is the secret which is going to be able to, is effective, he says, Sgula niflo lizgalos rotzon elyon. This is an amazing, a wondrous sgula to reveal the goodwill of the Eibishter. Just like the korban would have achieved. Shenema boys, it says, an aroma that's pleasing to Hashem. Because of the Yeshayahu, and as it says, the Novi says in Yeshayahu, Halozeh tikrat tzeim v'yem ratzon l'Hashem. Do you call this a fast day and a desirable day to God? Meaning, Miklal, implying that Shatzeim anirtzehu yem ratzon. He was implying that a proper tzayim, a tzayim hanirtza, is a yem ratzon. Yeshaya was rebuking them. He says, you call this a fast day? You call this a time of ratzon before Hashem? He wasn't criticizing their fasting. He was criticizing the way they were fasting. So the Alter Rebbe learns from that this is not the way you should be fasting. Fasting could achieve Ratzon to Hashem. Yeshaya is telling them, you call that fasting? You think that's going to achieve Ratzon before Hashem? I remember we were kids. We were in Beis Medrash. We were 15, 16, and the mashgiach over there tells us it was a tinus, and we use it as an excuse not to have to learn. So he says, "What do you think a tinus is?" He says, "I think a tinus is a day to go on a diet." He says, "That's not what a tinus. A tinus is a day to daven more and to learn more. We let you off school early because it's a fast day, so you may have a headache. But don't forget, what is the whole purpose of a tinus? The purpose of a tinus is to be able to come close to Hashem." So Yeshaya Novi is telling the people what does help your fasting. I don't know, I have to look up the background over there. But he's rebuking them, and obviously they were looking, it's a fast day. He says, this is not going to be a rotzen, yem rotzen. Miklal, that implies that the tzayim hanirtzah, that a proper tzayim, is a yem rotzen, is and can be a desirable day. So what is the Alter Rebbe leaving us off with over here at the end of Perek Beis? That fasting is what's going to achieve, that we need to achieve a second part. After we do tshuva, there needs to be achieved the reinstatement. That reinstatement is done through a korban todah, through the gift. Today we don't have the ability to bring that gift, so today it's done through fasting. And that fasting is tremendously potent and tremendously powerful, so that it's very vital that we know the formula of how that fasting works, and that the Arizal has told us with a different number of fasts. So that's what we're left up to. So someone asked the question before, so should we be fasting? Very good question. So far, yes. Now let's see what the Alter Rebbe continues. Perek Gimel, page Sadik Beis. Hinei chachmei hamusar ha'achreinim, the later, or the latter, wise people of Musa who lived after the Arizal. In other words, we're not talking about the Musa movement as opposed to the Hasidic movement and the other movement. We're talking about Musa, meaning the writings of the ethics, the ethical writings of Judaism, as opposed to the legal writings of Judaism. So there was the Arizal who gave us this formula, this prescription of the fastings. Amongst the later, after the post Arizal, there was a disagreement. They were divided in their opinion. Now, based on what the Arizal said, that there's a certain amount of fasting for particular type of sins. What happened if a person committed that sin a number of times? So if there's 151 fasts for anger, but what happens if he got angry a number of times? Does he have to do 151 for each time he got angry? Or is 151 cover everything? If he by mistake or whatever, he drank wine, that's also the Rabbanon, 61. So for each time he drank wine, he has to fast 61, or once for all of them. So here's really where the later sages are analyzing to understand what the results formula is. A person committed a sin a number of times. There are those that say there are those that say that he has to fast the number of fasts for that sin many times. How many times? According to the number of times that he committed the sin. For example, we mentioned this last week. For example, a man who released seed in vain, the number of fasts, which the Arizal writes in his Tikunei Tshuva, is Peidalatanis, 84 fasts. And therefore they hold, if he committed this 10 or 20 times, al derech mashal, for example, then he needs to fast 10 or 20 times, 84. By the way, the Alter Rebbe is later on going to tell us that these fasts don't need to be consecutive. Alter Rebbe is going to speak later on about fasting. He's going to tell us that the fasts can be done in the short winter days, 10 every winter. There's no rush. We're not leaving this planet soon, Mitzvah Hashem. So a person can choose once a week in the short winter days and fast then. This is all still, okay, I'm not going to, what's the word? Keep you in suspense. Obviously, the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us that we don't fast today anymore. We know that already from elsewhere. Right? The Alter Rebbe is soon going to tell us in a few chapters that today fasting is no longer the option because we're not healthy and so on, and it's going to be counterproductive, so we give tzedakah instead. But that's a whole separate subject of tzedakah. So I want to go through the system, the way the Alter Rebbe is teaching it to us. So he's analyzing now the idea of fasting. Okay, but don't start fasting yet because we didn't finish the whole thing. You got to get to the end of the book to know exactly what to do. So don't start fasting. Enjoy your lunch. So now the discussion is how many times. So one opinion says for each time that you committed a sin, whatever the sin may be, you got to fast for each time. So if you committed 10 or 20 times, you got to fast 10 or 20 times. In this case, it's 840 fasts. Why? What's the logic? Dumya, the carbon chatas. They said this is similar to the carbon chatas. Every time a person committed an aveda, which obligates a carbon chatas, so then he has to bring a carbon chatas. Shechayev lavi al kol pam v'pam. He has to bring it for each incident of bringing the carbon chatas. So that's their logic. The yesh midam and others compare it midam in inyan carbon eila. Others compare this to a carbon eila haba al mitzvah aseh. A carbon eila which is brought, as we said earlier, for the neglect of a positive mitzvah. What's the difference, as we said in the first chapter? The difference between a positive mitzvah and a negative mitzvah is, negative mitzvah has actually done something wrong. Positive mitzvah is I omitted from doing something right. It's a much lesser harm, much lesser damage to the relationship. If the husband did something wrong to the wife, something outright wrong, he has to say he's sorry, and he has to do tshuva and forgiveness, and then he can bring his gift. If he forgot to do something right, for whatever reason it was, he didn't do what he should have done, it's not as bad. That's where the husbands get into trouble. Because I didn't do something. It's not that I did something bad. It's a sin of omission. So for that, there's a carbon oila. And that comes even for mitzvahs aseh. So some of these opinions discussing and debating their results formula say that you have to bring a carbon each time because it's compared to a carbon chatas. Some say that it's compared to a carbon oila, which is even for mitzvahs aseh to fast, in other words. Even if a person transgressed a number of positive mitzvahs, the unique thing about the carbon oila is that miskapa ba'ila achas. One carbon oila can be a kapara for numerous omissions of mitzvahs aseh. Kedisa b'gemara. Perikama dezochim, as the Gemara says. Carbon chatas, which is for a negative sin, you got to bring one for each one, for each negative sin. Carbon oila, one can cover a bunch of positives that were omitted. Person decides to do tshuva that he missed saying Krishma on time, he brings one carbon oila, even though he missed a year, 10 years, whatever it was. He suddenly discovered after 20 years that there's such a thing as Seif Zman Krishma, the end of the time to say Krishma. So he wants to do tshuva. He does tshuva, then he wants to get closer to Hashem. So he brings one carbon oila, which will cover all of it. But if a person knew and consistently transgressed mitzvahs loisa, so he has to bring a carbon chatas for each one. So that's one opinion. The other opinion is obvious, that you bring one and that'll do for everything. So these are the differences of opinion in the formula of the Arizal. So the Alter Rebbe says, the acceptable decision in this matter is lis'anes gimel palmim, to fast 3 times the formula. To fast 3 times the number of fasts which the Arizal prescribes for this particular sin, whatever that may be. So, for example, the last example that we gave, the Hainu Reish Nun Beis Tzom is 3 times 84, is 252 for Hatzos Shich Vazer Levatala. And so too it would be V'chein Shara Chatoim V'Avedes, and so too it would be with other sins as well. The compromise between these different opinions is 3 times. So not once, which is one extreme of the opinion, not for every single time, which is one extreme of the opinion, but rather 3 times is the commonly accepted view. To undertake 3 times the number of fasts that have been prescribed for a particular transgression. What's the fact? So why 3 times? Either it's every time or it's once. What is it? It's not. What's the emes? What's the significance of 3? Why 3 times? So he tells an interesting thing here. The reason of 3 is based on what is written in the Zohar, Seif Pashas Neach, at the end of Pashas Neach. Gives us a lesson over here, a little bit in laundry. Kivan dechav banash kamei kuchabrichu zimnachada ovid rishimu. Kivan, as soon as dechav banash is a person. It's Aramaic. Dechav becomes sins. Kamei kuchabrichu before the Eibishter. Zimnachada. When a person commits a sin before the Eibishter, zimnachada one time. Ovid rishimu. He makes an impression. It causes there's an effect above. And if the Zohar continues, if he sins a second time, the impact is even greater. Zimnot Lisa, a third time, is Pashit Ahu Kisma Misitrada Sitrada. This kesem, this stain, that's the result of his sin, is Pashit, it spreads or penetrates Misitrada Sitrada from both sides. Like a garment that gets dirty. Sometimes it's dirty just on the outside. And if it gets very dirty, it gets soiled. It can even go from the out and it goes till you can see in the dirt, it's soiled even to the inside. So the first time a person sins, it causes damage above. Second time it causes damage. The third time it causes such damage, I guess it's in the neshama, that it goes through and through. He's using the example of laundry. Therefore, the number of fasts ought to be there, ought to be 3. 4, 5, 6, 7 is not going to make it more dirty. You spilled wine. Now, sometimes the wine spilled, wine's not a good example. It'll automatically go through the tablecloth to the other side. But if you have something less liquid as wine. So sometimes you just, you can careful and you flick it off and it won't leave a stain. Sometimes it'll leave a stain on the actual cloth. Sometimes it'll go through and through. Once it's gone through and through, it's not going to get more stained if more of it happens. It may spread more, but the actual stain is through and through. It doesn't get more stained through and through if more spills on it. So you're saying that's what happens over here. And therefore, if a person committed the sin once, and obviously he only has to do the series of fasting once. But if he did it twice, he only has to do it twice. But if it's 3 or more, says we do 3 times because as the Zohar says, 3 times makes the sin go through and through. Okay, so that is the formula, the prescription of fasting, and that replaces the Korban Oila, which is going to reinstate the relationship with Hashem. Avol kolze be'odam chazak ubori. At the top of the page already. All of this applies to who? To a healthy person. She'ein ribu yatzemis mazik loya. A person who the ribu yatzemis, the many fasts, don't harm him. Klal, whatsoever. Librius gufi, to the health of his body. A healthy person who fasting is fine. He's able to fast. It doesn't harm him. Where would you find such type of people? In the earlier generations. They were able to fast. Somehow their bodies were stronger. They had less pollution, less junk food, less all of the stuff that we eat. So physically they were healthier. They could fast. And even many fasts, repeated fasts, it didn't harm them. But whoever who the ribu atzem is the numerous fasts will cause harm to the point that it can bring him to illness or michush or weakness or pain. Chas v'sholem, like when? Like in our generations. In the Alter Rebbe's generation and on, obviously applies to us as well. We're fasting, or especially a lot of fasting, it can be very harmful. We know what we feel like after a full day fast. We know what we feel like after a 25-hour fast. Having to fast again and again. We can do it for one day, and we just about get through it. To do it again and again, twice a week, 3 times a week, or whatever, it's not healthy, and it'll cause a lot of weakness. Therefore, says the Alter Rebbe, also It's forbidden for us today in our generation to undertake all of these numerous fasts. Afilu, even for sins of krisis and Mrs. Besdin. Even for very severe transgressions. And I want to do a tshuva, but more than the tshuva that I want to do. That's the easy part. I want to reinstate my relationship with the Eibishter after this terrible offense that I committed against him. Even for that, says Alter Rebbe, don't fast today. It's forbidden to fast, not don't fast. Also, and certainly not to Makolchkin al mitzvahs asay mitzvahs lo yisaseh. Certainly not to fast for the omission of mitzvahs asay over the transgression of mitzvahs lo yisaseh. She'ein behem kodesh, which don't have a capital punishment, which don't have the punishment of death. Certainly, it's forbidden to fast today. So what do we do? Hello. Instead, kfi asher yishar benafshei, rather a person should, he's still talking about fasting. A person should yishar benafshei, should reckon, work out, estimate in your own life how much you can fast, how much fasting you can tolerate that won't cause any harm. That is what should be done. Not to take upon oneself these numerous fasts of that Arizal, because today we can no longer do that. But fasting is important. Fasting is significant. Fasting is in place of the Korban Oila. Fasting is my own flesh and blood. We just said how important and powerful it is. We ended up the previous chapter saying the mystery of this opens up. The mystery of this, we said, opens up his gallows and Ratzon Elyon. I want the benefit from that. So he says to do that, everyone has to. There's no rules anymore. You have to work out in yourself how much you can fast that will not cause harm. Because even in the earlier generations, even then, when they were healthy and fasting was common, they didn't fast in this instance, in this type of thing. Only those who were healthy. The matzu l'tziuri nafshayu, who were able, they were healthy enough to mortify themselves. And someone who goes against this, someone who does not have the strength to be able to mortify oneself, and yet goes ahead and fasts, nikra chayta b'gemara. The Gemara refers to him as a chayta, as a sinner. In Perek Kama Detainis, in the first chapter of the whole Gemara that speaks about fasting. Fasting only applies to people who are healthy enough and capable to be able to do it. If it's going to be detrimental to your health, it's forbidden. In fact, not just it's forbidden, that Alter Rebbe says also. Now he quotes from the Gemara and says such a person is called a sinner, which means you got to start over again and do tshuva again. It's actually causing you the opposite of reinstating closeness with Hashem. It's causing distance from Hashem. And then you're back to the same problem. You want to reinstate that closeness. It was counterproductive because now it's considered a chayta. And this applies even to someone who fasts for specifically known Avedas, as Rashi says over there. The Gemara says that there isn't a person who's innocent and is not guilty of even transgressing a positive mitzvah. Okay, this is a good point to leave it for today. So just to summarize what we said, again, the Alter Rebbe tells us in Perek Beis where tinus comes in Judaism, and that is not for tshuva, not for kapara, not for mechila, but rather tshuva comes for doirain, for a gift, to be able to reinstate that relationship. And today and that is the carbon, that's not tshuva, rather tinus, fasting comes as this doirain, as this gift. And that is what they brought the Korban Oila in the Beis Hamikdash. Today we don't have the Korban Oila, so today we have the various fasts that we were privileged that Rizal should be able to reveal to us the secret of how much fasting we'll be able to bring out the goodwill of the Eibishter. And then here he comes and tells us the discussion of how many times we should fast, and then secondly he tells us what happens if we're not able to fast, if it causes us harm and so on.
Can I just clarify one second? So if, assuming we're not healthy, so we shouldn't be fasting, is it as if we've fasted in order to reinstate the relationship, does not fasting if we'd wanted to, but we can't. So or is the relationship not reinstated because we weren't healthy enough to fast to reinstate it? I wasn't sure how that works.
Reinstatement still needs to be done in the relationship. Now we got to find, as we'll do next week and so on, an alternative to the fasting. We found an alternative to the Karbanayla. Now we need to find an alternative to the fasting.
Right, that's what I wanted to know. Thanks very much.
Is what the author was going to tell us about tzedakah.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
Remind us of the story if I don't remember next time. So what about tzedakah? You can say, after we're going to learn all about tzedakah instead of fasting, so you'll be able to ask the same question. What about a person who can't give tzedakah? He doesn't have money for tzedakah. So I can't remember who it was. Someone came to whichever who it was, and he says he can't fast. So give tzedakah. I can't give tzedakah. I don't have money to give tzedakah. He says, in that case, he shouldn't have sinned. You can't afford to sin.
Yeah.
You're not healthy enough to sin. You can't afford to sin. So keep away from it. Yeah, good question. We're going to come to that in the continuation.
Okay, thanks so much. Thank you.